we're going to talk about overhead and think about how we allocate overhead to our job sites. Now, here's how we do a lot of time when speaking towards labor. When you guys are starting to determine how many people do I need to run the job, and then also from our standpoint, from the project management standpoint, from an overhead standpoint, we always use the following rule. Whatever your salary is, we had 30% for fringe benefits, right? So if my salary is 100 grand, the real cost for me is 130. We can break down, which we will a little bit when we talk about staffing a job, why it's so important at the commercial construction management standpoint is the difference of putting someone on a job or not, or having an extra staff or not, with salaries being as high as they are, and included that 30% of fringe benefits, it really swings a bit, okay? Even if I can get Mark off of billing a job 1 month early, or I can have Mark on a job 1 month less than Ralph, that could be an $8,000, $10,000 swing on a job. These swings are actually very, very high. So if I can say, hey, I can get my job built with 4 people versus 5, that's a huge cost difference, especially when you're looking at professional salary. Hey, I don't need a full-time safety person. That's going to be a $130,000 difference between the company that does put a full-time safety person. So really being thoughtful on how you guys are running your jobs and who you select to run your jobs has a big impact on your estimate and the soft costs, right? You have to be very strategic, and I always tell folks in construction management, there's a lot of psychology that goes into this. There really is. You have to understand who can handle what type of job. I'm the type of person, I'm a grinder. I could probably run a job with less people on my job than maybe the average person. I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying, let's just use that as an example. Hey, Mirando's done good on his past projects. We're going to put a little bit more on his shoulders because we need to bid this one really tight. And we know that the trade-off for that decision is Anthony's going to work his ass off over the next 10 months. So what they would do, what I've done like with DCK, they would say, Anthony, we're going to come in tight, but you're going to get a project completion bonus. Okay? So I'd get 10% of my salary. That's what I negotiated in my contract. But I know that I'm going to put in 50, 60 hours weeks for 8 months. I was willing to do that because the carrot in front of the horse, I'm like, okay, cool. But I'm not going to get that project engineer that you might want. You can play with that if you know your staff and the abilities that your staff has. So rather than hire a whole nother project engineer to take workload off of us as a team and pay $90,000, they can pay $30,000 to across the staff in bonuses at the project completion, right? So you can actually play with staffing and what you pay with them. The next thing you can also do with staffing is stage them on your job smartly. So what we will do is during the heat of construction, if you see that cost profile that's there, at the point of your cost profile where it's the highest, you then want to have the most amount of staff overlapping each other. You want the most project management, or however you guys foreman, whatever it may be for your individual subcontractors, you want to align all of your staff is going to be there humming at full potential in the middle of that project. At the beginning, it might just be a PM and a project engineer and a super, right? You might have 3 staff over here. But then you're going to bring up, as we go over it in this big bulge, we're going to add an assistant superintendent, we're going to add another assistant engineer, and we're going to add a safety person. But their costs are only going to be reflected during this time period. Now that's tough. That takes a lot of shuffling. That takes a lot of really thinking about, and that's what operations managers do. I always thought that was pretty cool. Like you run into people who are operations manager. That's what they're really looking at, is optimizing where you guys are spending your time. I'm going to have the majority of my managerial and overhead cost at the highest level of complexity and the most increased part of scope for this job. right? So how you determine that is a couple ways. What's the size of the project? Now, size also might not be that good of an indicator of how much staff you need. That warehouse that I showed you guys, 55,000 square feet, big building, I ran it myself. I did every single thing. I was a project manager, the superintendent. It's a big ass box. It's not complex, right? It's big in size, but it's not complex. So how many people I need to run that's dependent on analyzing that job and allocating how many, and it might be, Mark choosing how many field staff he needs. You need to, and that's going to be determined off your scope of work. Hey, it's a big warehouse. We don't need as many people. Big Amazon type tilt in place, cast in place, whatever it may be, project, I might need less people because it's less complex. Then I've worked on projects like the Cleveland Foundation, which is dowel laminated timber, which is very complex, has a bunch of nuances, small building, high level of complexity. So you've got to have that understanding because that's going to help us determine our allocation of this overhead. Project location. So you've got to say, where's our project at? Is my staff willing to travel here? What are the limitations that my staff has? And I always tell our students, if you're open to working in different locations, it's going to open up what type of unique projects that you can be on. It's going to open up financial opportunities for you. But it's a big limitation. Next is our expertise. How you guys, from an estimating standpoint, align the expertise should be as follows. Okay? Give you guys a great example, the Kent State CAED, which is a cast-in-place post-tension building. I could have someone who's coming off a parking deck in Cleveland. Completely different buildings. All right, one's a K through or a higher education building, one's a parking deck. I want to align the critical path activities of that project with the next project, right? So maybe that project manager, the superintendent, or the field foreman who just built a parking deck would actually be perfect for the Kent State CAD because the biggest critical path of that building is the concrete. Very similar to the structure they just came off of. So when you guys are thinking about the allocation of your staff, really think about the expertise, not in terms of how long or what they've built, not in terms of how long they've built, but it's what they have built. Right? I know this is getting to the weeds and the details, but that's what we have to. And then obviously understanding your project requirements and contract. Project size, again, affects staffing. Cleveland Medical Mart, $475 million, over 25 full-time staff. JCI, that project, and the reason I say two, I just told you one before, it was me and an intern, and I had him for a couple months. All right, Beechwood High School was only $17 million, had 4 full-time staff. Scope was small, or project size was small. Scope was really unique. Turner's got a rule, 25 million and up, full-time safety personnel. So again, is our staff willing to travel? Do we have experience with weather in the local area? Is the staff knowledgeable about those local codes and regulations and governing bodies? Again, does the staff have the expertise to manage critical path tasks, right? Have they worked with the client before? Jeff Abke, who's a project executive with Turner Construction, has made his career off of not only being an awesome project manager and executive, he does all the Cleveland Clinic projects. Cleveland Clinic knows him. He knows the Cleveland Clinic. They actually ask and recommend for him to be on projects that Turner Construction is running. What better way to get you to the top than have a client say, hey, I want Tommy running this project, all right? So thinking about these things has an impact on how we staff projects. We talked about contractual requirements. Obviously, does the client require a certain number of staff? Do they require QA, QC certification? Depending on your job and your understanding of your scope of work, that's what's going to be required, depending. And that then requires you to put a whole nother person that meets a certain set of qualifications. And then the question is, can you find that person? Because a lot of times in the contract, it's going to stipulate minimum requirements, and you've got to make sure that that person does. Okay, so now we've determined like what the scope of work is, what the project is. Now we really get into quantity takeoffs. And a lot of times this is just evaluating the quantity takeoffs of our subcontractors, or it's producing the quantity takeoffs ourselves, or it's checking the work lot of times what I'll do from a PM standpoint, of course I'm going to check the overall number, but I'll spot check things. And I'll spot check things that are really important and on the critical path, right? Concrete cubic yardages for, again, the CAED. I might not do all the concrete, but I'll check some columns, I'll check some floors, I'll check some spot footings. I'll check certain numbers that are really going to be impactful to make sure I'm comfortable with that subcontractor's bid, right? But this is, again, done by building the project in our mind, and that is knowing the process, knowing the labor, materials, and equipment that are needed to complete that specific scope of work. And I always like to do this, guys. And a lot of subcontractors laugh at me, but during my pre-construction meetings, I'll be like, Bob, walk me through, like I'm an idiot, how you were gonna do this work. And you'll have people be like, okay, well, we're gonna pull the 12-2. No, I said, no. Like I'm an idiot, like I know nothing. I'm talking about, where do you guys meet in the morning? Well, we meet at the shop. Okay, start me there. We're gonna meet at the shop, we're gonna have 6 people. We usually have a pre-construction meeting about what we're gonna do that day. We get in our different vehicles, then we drive to the job site. I mean, I wanna know in layman's terms, especially in areas that I don't know or I'm not as well versed, you won't believe what you guys will find out about those subcontractors and how they operate, right? And how they do things. And it'll make you a better estimator, and you get a full understanding. Well, they're not gonna be at the job until 8 because they meet here and they do X and they're doing Y. You wanna know their process to the greatest extent that you can. I get it, we don't have time to go stand behind Ralph every time he's putting a ballard in. So I might wanna know that process, and I might not be able to observe it all the time, but I'm gonna say, Ralph, walk me through this, man. How do you get them here? Are they metal? Do you cast them that are here? Where do you get them? Like, literally understanding that process. You know what I always found too? While some people laugh at me at the beginning, contractors love to tell you that stuff. I'll find out from guys and gals a certain type of fastener they don't like. They don't like using this tile brand or this mortar brand because it's just difficult to work with. The little things. I'll hear.
Expect it for the next job, don't you?
No, no.
That's usually what the people want.
But you know what I try to do? I actually try to take that information and make substitutions to the architect or engineer, especially if it's an impactful way. Seriously. I might be different than most project managers in that, but I'm trying to find out those little details that's like, hey, the people in the field like this, can we spec that? Can we use this material? It's easily accessible. They're more productive. I have the data. Right? I know that's maybe going too far in the weeds, but man, there's been times where I've gotten things been able to be used, like, especially on substitutions for stuff. I'll never make a substitution recommendation for material to an interior designer or to an architect until I've talked to a Mark first. Until I've talked to Ralph, like, man, this Ballard company sucks. It's a pain in the ass to use these. Can we use this? I'll take that information to them and say, hey, this is going to increase Ralph's productivity. And I think folks in the field appreciate that you're out there, you're listening, you're getting that information. So again, when I say, hey, walk me through layman's terms, what material you use and what type of equipment, I'm constantly listening for them to tell on themselves, but I'm really gathering data. I'm gathering data in my data bank because it's going to make me a better estimator. To understand what a contractor has to go through. So I go down to the next level, I try to at least. And I try to look at the things, and the best way is you can't do that with every trade. We all know that. But really look at your critical path trades and say, Bob, tell me, man, how you're going to do this electric. What is tripping you up? What can I do from a PM standpoint or estimating standpoint to make your life easier, to reduce roadblocks for you, right? When we're looking at work packages, I also like to break it down per cost codes. You guys will always want to assign some form of coding, okay, to your subcontractors or to a work package. And this, to me, a lot of times is really to help on your internal documentation more than anything, okay? I will cost code line items to help me find information, Okay, and that's really what it comes down to is, if I need to be able to extract information, I like having a cost code associated to it. It allows me to pull data out of my Excel spreadsheet faster, right? We can break it down by location, installation schedule. You can look at work packages differently of how you assign it to subcontractors. They're unique, but I also need to be able to extract data really fast for like meeting sake too. We break it out a couple ways. Counted items, right? So again, I will spot check these types of things. Examples of counted items: lighting trays, diffusers, right? Scutcheon plates. In estimating, you can reflect things differently. What does that mean? You could count the ceiling tiles, right? Or you could give it a square footage. There are some things that are interchangeable, steel and tonnage, right? Or you could break it out really if you wanted to, like the W15 by whatever. You could break it out in certain different ways. Drywall, you have sheets of drywall, square footage of drywall, counted sheets, like I was saying before, 4x8s, 4x10s. It can be broken out in a couple different ways. So I always recommend, a lot of them are standard, right? But do it in a way that is going to be most communicative to that subcontractor who's doing the work. So if a contractor presents their bid and drywall and a square foot costs, that's typically the way that I reflect it in mine. It's just something that I typically do. Countertops could be, square foots, or they could be individual pieces that are listed. Whatever that bid quote that I usually get is the way I typically reflect it. I don't like to change a lot of times from the way the subcontractor is communicating, because a lot of times it's reflective of the way that they're costing and pricing it. So sometimes contractors will give me a square foot cost for finished drywall. Like that's how they like to present their bid. It's 50 cents per finished square foot or whatever it may be, right? So I like to just kind of, whatever that subcontractor wants to see it, I reflect it that way for the job. But in my home sheet that I'm evaluating everything in, I'll just put it in the way that I like to evaluate it, because I want those to be consistent. And the cool part about a lot of these counted items and linear and sheet and roll goods, you can extrapolate up or down really easily, right? You can figure out a 4x8 or 4x10 sheet's 40 square feet. You could do by sheet, you could do by square footage. Very easy to go up or down. So whatever you decide to put in there, just make sure that you can easily go up or down in the way that you communicate it. A lot of times too, Mark will give me a cost in a certain way, and then the client wants to see it in a different format or in a different methodology. That's fine, as long as you can extrapolate up and extrapolate down. It all really depends. Linear components, base trim. Vertical studs you can do in linear footage. I like to break them out by height. Countertops you can do in square footage or counted, like depending how they are. I've done them like individual pieces. If it's a kitchen, I'll just do an individual and I'll call it 12 by whatever, the specific dimensions that it is. Could be counted items. I've also done typical countertops like in hotels. They're all the same. So you could just give them as counted, 550 of these types, however it may be. It's how you want to break it out. It's how it makes the most sense. It's how the client and who's evaluating it wants to see it. Oh, here's another thing too in my estimates. I try to make it as clean as possible. And what do I mean by that? I want to eliminate as many line items as I possibly can. All right? So like individually listing all the countertops probably wouldn't make sense. I want to choose the format that can shrink it down to the most palatable level that I can easily extrapolate out if I need to, right? So making your sheet as clean as possible. A lot of times when you guys are presenting to a client, you're submitting a bid to your boss, whatever it may be, people get scared by how much information's on the page. You can really go down to the nitty gritty. I could come up with 1,000 line items in this room if I really, really wanted to. We all probably could. At what level do you break and reflect and combine things is kind of an art form. There's no real answer to that. It's all based, in my opinion, off who is reading and evaluating my estimate, right? So I always err on the side on my documentation, on the inside of all this stuff, my back end, I'm super detailed here in my crazy ways. I've reflected how I want to see it, how I want to do it, and then I shift. And I say, okay, this estimate, I'm going to use bright, pretty colors because they need help. That's okay too. So how well versed is your client? Who's reading your estimate is half the battle to estimating. They want to see these costs broken out. Oh, here's another cool thing that I actually did. Let me see if I can zoom in. I've done this now in my estimates, and it might be of some value to you guys, especially, let's say Tommy's giving an estimate to a client, and they haven't decided on that countertop yet, but they have an idea, right? So this example, in residential, we see huge fluctuations in cost, especially because, you know, when you're looking at commercial grade countertops, they're all pretty tight to each other because everyone knows you ain't gonna pick no $150 square foot countertops to put in a medical hospital. No one's gonna do that, right? They're really a lot more competitive. So what I'll do moving forward, I give ranges. This covers my ass too, by the way. So Tommy, you might want to present to that owner, hey, the stove you're looking at could cost up to 25 grand if you really want to go that high, right? The low you're looking at is about 2,200, and then we come up with an average cost. So what I do in areas, if I'm basing it off of a feasibility estimate, I put in ranges. And then I'll reflect in my total cost, I'll just reflect the average. But it's documented and it's shown, these are the ranges. And it might make sense, instead of adding escalation, like we talked about an increase, you might have copper pricing, and you might just show a range. Give a high price per square foot, or however you order, maybe in tons. I'm not sure how you guys are ordering it, but give a high, give a low, and give an average. It's okay to include that in an estimate, and just in your assumption show, I've included average costs based on the range. Now again, in commodities that we work with in commercial, the range ain't gonna be this damn big. And then the thing you just have to worry about, right, is like best price today might not be best price tomorrow. But again, that's getting into the weeds. That's maybe going to the next level you don't really need to, but that's really nice advantage. But I'd recommend, I tell our students all the time, they're like, I don't know, there's such a wide cost. Great, show that range. There's nothing wrong with that. Show that range. As long as you're making the clarification and assumption and you're telling them this is the average cost that I'm utilizing, your ass is covered. And I'm not saying use it in every instance, but now they can also look and see. Now here's the next level too, is we're flushing out feasibility study. Now I will tell them and show them, you want to now spend money in certain areas. So for example, I would probably choose higher end things in the higher end spaces that you care about. And it allows you to almost, and you can color code and pick and choose, where do I want higher quality? Where do I want less? At least it gives your client a chance to make those decisions, to allocate, let's spend high over here, low over here. And I think what this does, if I presented this to a client, and I have before, they love that you're looking forward, that you're trying to mitigate their risk by providing them options and ranges. And just say, listen, there's a range here, choose, I'm basing off an average, I'm looking out to make sure we don't have a change order in the future. And again, it could be an escalation of cost, it could be product, it could be that stage in the CAED. Instead of putting an allowance, put a range. And that way, when you're presenting that estimate, there was nothing that you pulled over their eyes or that they're gonna have a question mark with later, right? Because remember, if we put in that stage 25 grand and it ends up costing 50, there's gonna be an issue down the road or potential. But if I put 50, and then all the way down to here, I'm covered because I presented that range of data. I'm like, hey, it could be up here, it could be down here. So it gives you a little bit of wiggle room to just be like, we don't know, but I'm telling you, man, you can go crazy, right? Or you could be here. I've interjected these things over the years too, guys, and it's something that you got to think about doing too, is like, what can you do to address, and the same thing might be for labor scales. Maybe Mark puts a range in, hey, if we get a Mexican crew from Indiana, it's this, or this over here. You can start to build things into your estimate sheets that are going to help you. Every estimate I produce is different than the one I did before because I've found better ways to present it, more formulas or less formulas, ranges now to include. Because again, I developed the ranges because of the influx of costs, because of the range of materiality usage and cost effective. So like, I've just started doing that because I'm like, hey, this is a good thing. So constantly evaluating your projects. What we really wanted to cover today is that general estimating process, what you need to evaluate and look for through the scopes of work, how to set up your own process, how to constantly review the information that you're putting out there and looking for ways for profit centers, looking for ways to make your estimates more accurate in the soft cost realm of things, okay? Right? But just know estimating is complex. I always say that, it's guesstimate. If I could predict the future, I'd hit the Powerball. I've always said that, man, you know? So it's a challenge, but I want you all to focus on your process. Focus on honing in your process. That investment will pay you dividends. Evaluating scopes of work, following that process that we talked about or coming up with your own, having checks and balances for yourself, right? That's really a key integral part to this.